In the spring of 1997, a professor in an Eastern philosophy class posed an exam question. The third wave is approaching. Should we preserve traditional culture or embrace a new civilization? It was an either-or choice. Synthesis or a middle path was never offered as an option. I wrote honestly on my answer sheet. Korea survives by relying on exports, and to survive in the digital age, it must embrace the new civilization. By new civilization, I mean the combined arrival of digital networks, global markets, and American cultural influence, not a simple moral good. I was also angry at the hypocrisy of those who pursued empty formalities, used etiquette only as a tool to impose a hierarchical culture, and yet enjoyed the new civilization themselves. So I added one final paragraph to my answer. Confucius must die for the nation to live. To be clear, the original philosophy of Confucius, rooted in Run, benevolence, and Shu, empathetic reciprocity, was a beautiful inquiry into human empathy and natural connection. Yet, by the end, it was stripped of its humanity and weaponized into a dogma of control. During Korea's last dynastic era, Confucius was revered even more devoutly than in China. When China was in turmoil, Koreans took pride in seeing themselves as Confucius's spiritual descendants. That culture of Confucian hierarchy was reflected even in the standardized language and writing system established during colonial-era modernization, making the linguistic culture itself hierarchical, turning what should have been mutual respect into a constant neurological enforcement of rank. Within this social culture, women occupied the lowest rank. The result of the exam was harsh. The professor demanded that I be suspended and expelled. Other professors dissuaded him, so I avoided expulsion, but all my grades that semester were lowered. Through that experience, I learned one thing. When the established order is threatened by words, it responds not with logic but with force. But the IMF financial crisis at the end of that year forcibly shattered that old patriarchal shell. The problem was that unprepared freedom arrived in the space it left behind. To explain why I reacted so strongly in 1997, I need to go back to what I saw during my military service a few years earlier. I came to see through the brutal mechanisms of sex and power during my military service, thanks to the professionals at the bottom of society whom I met at a remote frontline post. At night, I patrolled a military fence. When I was allowed out into the civilian area, I waited for transportation back to base at a tea house by the terminal. That tea house was a workplace of sex labor for women living within a structure of male desire, hypocrisy, and exploitation near the border. A dabong was originally a place that sold tea. You can think of it as a cafe. Later, cafes became more common in Korea as well. The difference was whether the tea and coffee culture had developed within Korean male culture or Western tea and coffee culture. A dabong where a customer could pay to go out with a woman and spend time alone with her was called a ticket dabong. I often talked with the women who worked there. I was a virgin at the time and had grown up in a conservative sexual culture, so I did not view them as sexual objects. They taught me about men's desire for conquest, hypocrisy, gaslighting, and a social structure that had exploited women's lives through sex. It was knowledge about life that could not be learned from books. Those encounters did not give me a complete understanding of sex. They gave me a harsher lesson. Desire, power, and freedom can become entangled. In 1996, after completing my military service, I returned to university and told the younger women I was close to about this absurd social structure. Moreover, American digital civilization was arriving together with its culture. I advised them not to ruin their lives by pursuing freedom too hastily within a social structure that had not yet changed. But they asked not only how to avoid danger, but also how to enjoy relationships with dignity. During my military service, the professional women had not taught me how to enjoy sex, so I could not teach them that. Then one of them said, "Isn't your rule in life to do everything properly? Now you should learn how to enjoy it too, and then teach us." So I respectfully asked a self-made woman who had overcome a difficult life to teach me. I learned the role a man should play for a woman in bed, techniques for relationships, and things women should not do. The details belong in another film. For this story, the point is that freedom without an understanding of power can become another form of exploitation. In 1997, the IMF economic crisis smashed Korea's existing social order. Lifetime employment collapsed, patriarchal breadwinners were thrown out onto the streets, and the framework sustained by the Confucian family system was shaken all at once. It was also the period when Generation X began to lead social change, and progressive thinking and a culture of self-expression were booming. These trends of the era served the spread of American-style capitalism and globalism. As a result, the breakup of families accelerated. When one household lives together, its members share a home, a car, and appliances. As households divide, consumption increases. Capital celebrated individualism, and the structures of family and marriage were rapidly destabilized. For women in particular, it was their first experience of a culture of freedom, desires suppressed until marriage, and choices they had never been allowed to make. That door suddenly opened. The problem was that no one properly explained what lay beyond it. The women's movement at the time called for liberation and breaking taboos, but it did not explain how sex could be used as a weapon of exploitation, or how this new freedom could itself be instrumentalized. Many of the women who stepped through that open door without a compass arrived in the sex work settings of the new civilization. For example, working as karaoke hostesses or in room salons. I became worried as I watched this trend around me. So I spoke to as many people as I could about sex and liberal culture, and I also helped women who had gone down the wrong path or become involved with the wrong men. In March 2000, Seoul's Tehran Road was the center of the IT venture boom, a place where people who wanted to change society within the new civilization gathered. I had an interview and meeting at OnLab. Female directors were present. They were intelligent and serious people. We discussed many things: digital civilization, women's role, and what a changing society needed. During a 3-hour discussion with the directors, I argued that imitating male debauchery was not freedom, and that liberation without judgment could become another form of subjugation. What I felt during that conversation was this: these people wanted to change something. Genuinely, they were sincere. What I witnessed shortly afterward was pure darkness. A cartel of political power and corporate chaebols moved swiftly to crush the intellectual and organizational rise of women. The mobsters they deployed brutally abducted, assaulted, and terrorized female leaders, crushing our resolution into the dirt. In my view, raw state-aligned violence suffocated the dawn of a true female era at its birth. The supreme irony was that this brutality occurred under the Democratic Party's DJ administration, led by a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Intellectual liberation that threatened the system was suppressed, while sexual indulgence and consumerism that benefited the system expanded. Afterward, the Korean women's movement lost the path of orderly evolution and drifted toward a direction in which breaking norms became an end in itself. Moreover, following the IMF economic crisis, a distorted form of creative destruction was fiercely in vogue. A forced social dissolution driven by a desperate belief that people had to strip away everything and change instantly to survive in the new digital civilization. The first button was fastened incorrectly, and the conflict between men and women in Korea remains deeply entrenched to this day. There is the exact phenomenon economists define as newly affluent societies. It is the universal pattern every society undergoes upon crossing the threshold of material prosperity. Under capitalism, the moment survival anxiety eases, the brain's reward circuit explodes into hyperreactivity, and capital waits patiently with products engineered specifically to hijack those neural pathways. In that process, the language of feminism was captured as well. Capital put on the outer garment of women's liberation and began selling consumption, exposure, and pleasure. We entered an age in which exposing the body on stage and depicting sexual acts were called empowerment. This is not freedom. It is the language of instrumentalization dressed in the language of liberation. This dopamine order, which spread from the United States, turned even feminism into a consumable identity, in other words, fashion feminism. The fashion feminism I warned about in March 2000 has become the global standard. Achieving true independence as an authentic feminist is demanding. One must shoulder the crushing weight of life, fulfilling equal societal roles despite possessing less raw physical strength than men. To accomplish this, one must lead a rigorous, disciplined life, constantly training and maintaining one's mind and body. Consequently, most choose the path of least resistance. Developing the argument that they must be protected due to physical vulnerability, they demand freedom without responsibility, giving rise to female exceptionalism and transforming societal courtesy into an unconditional entitlement. Social media now overflows with this grotesque contradiction, declaring radical independence while desperately craving to be pampered, protected, and treated like a domestic pet. The essence of sex disappeared in the process. Skills filled the empty space left by the loss of human connection and dignity. At its absolute extreme is a commercial deception created by the Japanese AV industry, packaging urination as female ejaculation. In a world where women's real pleasure and dignity have been completely erased, it is a distorted fantasy born from an industry that treats the human body merely as a tool for commercial success. Intimacy has lost its dignity, reduced to nothing more than techniques of mechanical mating. We now live in a world where only what can be captured on camera remains. In a dopamine economy and an attention economy, what becomes our standard for choice? Who gets to decide our desire, our anger, and even our sense of justice? AI has made search and connection effortless, but it has also placed us inside floods of data and oceans of fake information. So people outsource judgment, more easily than ever, to brands, algorithms, and tribal politics. Technology can widen our choices. It cannot choose for us. In the end, the final standard must be built by each person. Where, then, should the feminism of the future go? I don't believe there is only one correct answer. There are radical voices, moderate voices, and conservative languages. And priorities can differ by era, class, and community. But there is a shared minimum ground. The strength to endure process, not just chase fast dopamine rewards. And the ability to stand on one's own feet before demanding validation and protection. Consideration is not the same as a right. The moment we confuse the two, freedom becomes tradable again, another tool. Self-esteem should not be a weapon to defeat others, but an armor that protects one's own choices. True freedom does not lie in simply throwing things off. It means thinking for oneself and protecting oneself in a world of predators. That is the only way to preserve dignity in the dopamine hunting ground of fashion feminism and capitalism.